Okay, we're going to be taking questions. Okay, George, I'll speak up. We're going to be taking questions in just a minute. I do want to mention on the book, you can order it from Amazon, or we have Ken Kaufman here, and he says you can order it directly from him at stairwaypress.com. His daughter is shaking her head, yes. stairwaypress.com/Skagit, and you get a discount. And Ken's got his own book coming out, has come out, that I'm going to be reading here pretty soon, so that should be enjoyable. One other thing I wanted to inform Dr. Ball that Paul Ehrlich, I don't know if you know him personally, but you're probably unaware that he just came out with a new prediction. He says very soon we'll be eating each other. We're going to revert to cannibalism. I'm not kidding, he did. So.
It's one of the values of university. They keep these people out of harm's way.
Oh well. Anyway, if you
questions about anything,
yeah, if you have a question, please come up here and X marks the spot. Stand right here and ask the question. Please don't filibuster. Give a dissertation. Just ask a question. So
I don't want to discourage you while he's coming up here, but at the end of a class, I say, "Are there any questions?" And they all sit there saying, "I'll kill anyone that asks a question. I want to get out of here." Sorry, go ahead, sir.
Good evening, Dr. Ball. Thank you for coming and enlightening us. I appreciate being in the presence of a true ethical scientist. I'm aware of the scientific method, having participated somewhat in my career. On what basis, if any, are you ever attacked on weaknesses in your science by your colleagues?
Well, actually, some of the nastier attacks have been from inside the university. I was chastised by my department because I published articles in the local newspaper, and they said I had no right to do that. In fact, I got a 3-page letter from one of my colleagues, which a lawyer said was libelous. And politics in university, I've worked in government, I've been in the military, and I've worked in private industry. Politics in academia is absolutely the most vicious anywhere. It fulfills what I've always said, is that there's 2 ways to get ahead. You can pull yourself up or you can push the other person down. And when you've got all of the academics determining the careers of all the other academics, they spend all their time pushing everybody else down and push themselves up. And I forgot what it was, C.P. Snow, I think, who said that politics in universities are so vicious because they're so inconsequential. Yeah. But it really is nasty. In fact, I joked about I took early retirement because there was so much scar tissue on my back, there was nowhere to put a knife anymore. And the lawsuits that I've had are from, well, 3 of them were from academics, 1 from a bureaucrat, and all filed through the same lawyer in Vancouver. And I've had death threats. I'm not particularly proud of that. And I didn't want to tell people about that because we talk about ethics. Many scientists are afraid to speak out. We had one just recently, Bengtsson, a Swedish scientist who declared, he joined a global warming policy foundation group, which is skeptics, and he just got hate mail. He said, "I don't need this. I don't want these sorts of attacks." So there are many scientists that won't speak out. You get scientists who tell me that, oh, they're socialists, and if they agree with the position I'm presenting, they're immediately classified as conservative or right wing, and they don't want to be classified as conservative or right wing. But of course, that's one of the things that the political left do so well, is pigeonhole people. They label them, and of course that labeling is part of the same attacks. For example, if you dare to question anything about documents with Obama, you're called a birther. These are all political public relations strategies, or you're called a conspiracy theorist. It's to marginalize people. It happened to me when I was called a global warming skeptic. And then I pointed out, as the gentleman here implied, that all scientists are skeptics. The scientific method requires that you be a skeptic. That the scientific method says you create a hypothesis, then other scientists challenge it. But what happened with the global warming hypothesis was, as Richard Lindzen from MIT said, was it became consensus immediately. And anybody that dared to attack it was marginalized as a global warming skeptic. And I try to point out to people, no, I'm not saying that global warming hasn't occurred. All I'm saying is humans aren't the cause of it. But they couldn't even understand that distinction. And then when it changed to climate change, of course, the names against me changed. I became called a climate change denier, with all of the Holocaust connotations of that word. And I was first called a climate change denier on the Times of London front page. I have to mention that because, you know, I just telling the Queen last week how much I hate name droppers. But you know, as I said, the word denier is deliberate with the Holocaust connotations attached to it. And so the frustration, though, is in the long term for me, the damage this is doing to science and to the environmental issue. As I said, the credibility of science. But Voltaire once said it's never wise to disagree with the authorities in power. And nobody knew that better than Voltaire. And so I do this very reluctantly. And I quite seriously think if I was to go back and do it again, I wouldn't do it. It is that nasty. You have no idea how vicious people can get and colleagues can get until you dare to question the prevailing wisdom. And of course, that's why the founding fathers not only made free speech your First Amendment, but they made the Second Amendment the way to defend the First Amendment. and because they understood that better than anybody. And so, yeah, I'm a reluctant hero because I do tend to agree with what Edmund Burke said when he said that all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to stand idly by. And I tend to agree with that. My biggest concern has been the damage to my family or attacks on my family. Fortunately, that hasn't happened yet. But also, of course, in terms of loss of income, because I never received any research grants, even though I've been accused of getting money from the oil companies and everything else. And so it is very difficult. And that's why it's so important for all of us to defend free speech and the people that dare to stand up, even if you disagree with them. And by the way, one of the things that's encouraged me is after we'd spend all our savings on lawyers, then we got a website and money came in from around the world to help. My legal bills have run to $300,000 already. And so you get a measure. But I had people actually sending me money saying, look, we don't totally agree with you, but we defend your right to say it. And that's very encouraging. And of course, it's the whole concept of Voltaire's idea, for your right to say things. So, as I said, I'm worried about the credibility of science. I'm worried about the loss of credibility on environmental issues, because there are problems, there are issues that we need to deal with. But as I said, people are getting to the point where, and in fact, what you're going to see in the US Senate coming up, as you saw with the Kyoto Protocol, when it came up, they voted 95-0 against it. Because they said, look, it's going to cost jobs and affect the economy. That's really what it comes down to. So I thank you for your question. And yeah, they've thwarted the scientific method, and academic politics is vicious.
Yes.
Thank you.
The journals as well have been corrupted.
Oh, yeah, the questions about journals. Because one of the things I mentioned about funding, there was a significant change during my career, and it was across the Western world. It used to be publish or perish, right? If you weren't publishing, you would perish. And the reason for that was if you were publishing, then you were up to date, you were at the frontier of your area, and so on. But then what happened was government started cutting funding to universities. It started in the 80s, and it was the first austerity thing. And universities, of course, seeing that loss of funding, they didn't want to push up the fees too much, although they're already exorbitantly high. So what they discovered was they could shave money off of any research funding that a faculty member got. Because, and legitimately, they were arguing the faculty member were providing space and heat and all the rest of it, so they should pay for that. So they started taking a minimum of 35% off any research funding that came in. Of course, what that did was it made the faculty member that was bringing in large research funds far more valuable to the university. So they got the promotions and they got to be the glory ones. So that was one of the major shifts in funding. But the question was asked about the journals, because the journals, it used to be to get published, you had to pay some of the journals to publish your stuff. And the journals were run, they were very unprofitable. Well, the journals decided they were taking over publishing companies, particularly like Elsevier, for example, and they started charging huge amounts of money for those journals. And of course, then it became, who could afford to get published? And they published only those things that they knew would sell lots of journals. So the more controversial the article could be. You saw it with Scientific American. Scientific American was describing things very nice, the public could understand different scientific issues. And then they started losing money. So they started, global warming, the sea level, they went off in all this alarmism because it sold magazines. Well, that happened to the academic journals, and it was a truly terrible shift. But also what happened was that some of the editors of the journals were in bed with these climate scientists. Because one of the things that they did to marginalize people like me was they'd say, he's not got many peer-reviewed articles. Well, what they were doing was they were peer-reviewing each other's articles. All right? And they were picking out, you can be an author on this article. And they were deciding whose names would go on, because then that padded their publication list. I mean, the corruption went within all of this publication and peer review. It made a mockery of the peer review. That hockey stick thing, which I never got to see it, but if I'd have seen it, I'd know what was wrong with it. But it was peer reviewed. But who was it peer reviewed by? His buddies that were in the same game. And so they made a mockery of the peer review process as well. And the journals went along with that. Nature particularly was bad. So there was corruption all throughout. And it was for the two things. It was the funding and it was the political agenda. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes? On the spot.
Right.
On the spot. X marks the spot.
From all my readings of the tea leaves, it seems like sea level rise is the best indicator of global warming. How accurate is that statement scientifically?
The sea level question is not very accurate at all, partly because sea isn't level.
It varies around the globe.
It
right.
varies around the globe. And for example, if you go through the Panama Canal, the sea level is different on one side than the other. And you say, how can that be? They're connected around the bottom of South America. But you don't know. You got to shift gears to get up into the Atlantic. And you get, because of the gravitational strength in the Earth's crust, will cause bulges in the surface of the ocean. We knew a lot about this when we were doing anti-submarine work, because we're flying very close, and we needed to know how the sea levels vary. Sea level varies also with the atmospheric pressure. Because when you get a hurricane, for example, the pressure is so low that the sea actually rises up. And that intensifies the problem of a hurricane, because that bulge, which is a very long wave, moves along with the hurricane. Now, if that comes on shore at high tide and with an onshore wind, then the storm surge is going to be much greater, and that's what happened with Katrina. Now they claim with satellites that they can measure sea level, but how can you do that? The oceans are not smooth and flat. And I worked with a guy who spent 3 years trying to determine gases moving in and out, and he said that the rippling of the oceans is so great that you can't get accurate measures. You simply can't do it. But of course, they want to tell you they can measure the ocean within millimeters. It's simply not true. And we've also got some interesting measures. There's one in Australia where they marked the sea level back in, I think it was 1870 or something. And the sea level is lower now in that region. But as I mentioned when I was talking, if you're on the shore, you don't know whether the sea level is going up and down or the land level is going up and down. And that also creates a problem. Yeah. How are we doing?
Remember to step on the X.
Right on the X. I put the X there.
Can you make sure the microphone's turned toward you, please?
No, it's the wrong way. So the new threat on the environment is ocean acidification.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Okay, ocean acidification, which is of course being pushed very strongly here in your state by a mussel farmer out on the coast. And we won't get into the politics of that. The term ocean acidification is wrong scientifically. The oceans are alkaline. They're becoming less alkaline, not becoming more acidified. The average for the oceans is about 9, but the variation in ocean alkaline levels varies tremendously around the world. And so this is another one of the things that they're trying to argue, that the CO2, more CO2 is absorbed into the oceans, and therefore that changes the acidity. It's just simply, it's simply not true. It's just another of the scares. But what can you do about it? They get the headline, and then that's where it ends. And that's all they're interested in. They never follow up on the other side of the story, and that's the difficulty. But yeah, what's changing, by the way, now, the next issue is going to be water. Because in that list I showed you, the Club of Rome, they list water shortages. There's no shortage of water in the world, none whatsoever. There's variations in the availability of water. Distribution is unequal. And is that like income inequality? I'm very attuned to what's going on, you know. I mentioned earlier about Canada having 1/3 of the world's fresh water, and the NAFTA being all about that. But there really is no water shortage, but they want to make that the next issue. And in fact, if you go to your Google, you Google peak water, they're already talking about peak water. And in fact, it was a Professor Gleick from where else? Stanford, who is pushing this idea, in fact created the term peak water, and it suggests that the world's reaching its peak of water and then we're going to run out of it. And again, it's absolute harem-scarum nonsense. But that's the issues. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for your talk, and your ability to keep your sense of humor throughout all this is wisdom for all of us.
I love gossip too.
I live out in the islands, and we've kind of got a network of former Stanford graduates out there who are a bit of a challenge to all of us. Yeah. I wanted just to kind of ask, maybe it's kind of one of the closing questions, but what do you see as the end game? I have a feeling that in your mind you can see where this all may be heading, what the cure might be. Is there a tipping point?
I think the tipping point was when Tipper left Al, but that's the question is, well, the motive, of course, was implied in that comment by Maurice Strong. They want one world government, right? And they think that nationalism and individual nations simply have got to disappear. And that's why they wanted something that was global in its threat, and argued that no one government could manage it. They came very close. In 2009, there was a conference was supposed to be held in Copenhagen. It was held actually in Copenhagen, at which they were going to finalize the carbon tax for the world. That was going to fund all of this one world government. And it was going to be done through the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which of course is another of these great overarching, unaccountable bureaucracies. And these people really believe that only they can run the world, that it's got to be one world government, and that's the only way. Maurice Strong certainly believes that. Maurice Strong grew up in southern Manitoba, on the prairies, in the dirty 30s. So the hard times, you could see why he had a leaning towards socialism. His sister, by the way, has been a lifelong Marxist, and everybody's entitled to their political opinion. but she's much more extreme about it than he is. But that's the agenda. They want one world government. They want to get rid of national governments and individualism. But of course, that's also going on within every country. It's the suppression of the individual to the greater good, and they'll use whatever vehicle that they claim you're threatening or will bring about the end of the world or the end of the nation as a vehicle to control you. So that's really what's happening. So just leave me alone, eh? But that, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have, I think we got time for maybe one more question. If not, I think Representative Elizabeth Scott came in after we started, so there she is right there. So, anyway, Professor Ball, it's been a delight. I really enjoyed that. So thank you very much.